All right, so thanks again, Joyce, Kim, Kayla, and Karen. Really appreciate your talks. So the first question that we had was from Elise, and it was for Joyce about, were you worried about leaning on students too much or danger of that kind of work shifting to them permanently? And Joyce, you very kindly answered some of this in text. I wanted to ask if you are interested in expanding on that.
Sure. I think that it wasn't something that really crossed my mind because it was all I had. I had inherited those students as part of a program that someone that I supervised oversaw. And so I really needed to depend on them. And it ended up working out really well because they were incredibly talented students. They were already at that point kind of familiar with what we did. And so it ended up working out really well. And it's actually something that I'm trying to implement with this current cohort that I'm working with, because that position is still remains unfilled, the supervisor of those students. So I'm still leaning on them, and I think it works out well for all of us. So I'm continuing with that.
All right, thanks so much, Joyce. All right, and then a question for Karen. Can you talk a little bit more about merging your two teams together? How long did the process take, and how did you handle pushback about the process, if there was any? And we're in library, so I'm guessing there was some.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about it. I definitely wanted to put more of that into my presentation, but the 10 minutes kind of caught up to me pretty quickly. So one of the biggest challenges with the merging of the teams did come from the fact that when those individuals within those units had been hired, they were kind of given a lot of different promises from upper administration. So I think for some of them, they felt like power and some autonomy was being taken away because one of the units did work. Some of the work that they did had been very siloed. And so kind of getting people together on understanding that some of the decisions needed to be for the betterment of the unit as a whole, and not just because that was a preferred preference of an individual. Was definitely difficult. And the process overall, as I mentioned in my presentation, did take phases. So it almost took about a year and a half to fully get the team structure up and running, get everybody in their positions. And, in that process, I definitely had some personal issues with resignation and because we had retirement. One of my team members did end up leaving for another university in the middle of all of this. So I'm currently in the process of hiring 3 vacancies. So there's that part of the equation that's coming on board. But one of the things that both me and my department chair worked on very diligently throughout this whole process is that development of trust and having continuous lines of communication. So using our unit meetings effectively to talk about new procedures and processes for certain services. For example, our research consultation service had to move to a standardized form for data collection purposes, and this hadn't been done before. Everybody had kind of been able to do their own, which made it really difficult to get accurate data. And I mean, prior to our unification, we pretty much had to throw out all of the graduate librarians' data because it didn't match. And there was a lot of inconsistencies because I think it's through these conversations, through this communication, also developing clear vocabulary was also really important so that when we mentioned something, everybody on the team knew what the other person was talking about. So those are just a couple of things that did come into play, and there was definitely pushback. Certain things, it was definitely individual by individuals. No, so it wasn't as much. So I will say this: I had a really positive experience in the sense that there wasn't a universal pushback to the merge in and of itself. I think everybody understood that the units needed to come together. There needed to be just a single unit providing research and instructional services to the university as a whole. But there were certain elements that our unit oversees that people had personal attachments to. LibGuides, research consultation, certain processes and procedures, and I would get pushback because of those personal attachments more than anything.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Karen. I think that probably really resonates with a lot of people's experiences. And as we're just hearing about in the keynote, people feeling really attached to certain parts of that job and finding that balance between individual agency and the institutional needs. So yeah, I think definitely that's resonant. Okay, so now a question for Kim. Knowing what you know now, would you still take on the interim leadership and management role? And what, if anything, would you do differently?
Thanks so much for that question. I had a couple minutes looking at that thinking, well, I really have grown so much in the last academic year, and I appreciate so much of what I've learned and the people I've been able to work with. I do not think that the library would have really held together if someone hadn't been in the role that I'm doing, one of my many hats. But I definitely would do so many things differently. I mean, a period of leadership, a position of leadership gives you like so much like retrospective like insight, and you're like, oh. And I think finding that article from so long ago, and actually the whole experience of being at COM so far this week, and the other shout out to the great presentation on Monday about being an interim and the precarity and risk and vulnerability there. I now with confidence would say, you know, I'd take that advice up front and have a straightforward conversation with my dean and be like, I need to be compensated for this position. The article mentioned that a lot of us, like me personally, are given a stipend that's a percentage of our original salary. And as a young early career librarian, my salary is extremely low compared to what my predecessor was making as a manager. And so that's not really fair to say a percent of what I was doing as a liaison should reflect the managerial responsibilities. Also, just like setting out what it would entail, like what things I would take on, if there were things that just would not get done for the entire time, and trying to set a firm end date if possible, or like negotiate like what's going to happen if we don't make this like time frame, like if you don't post this job, like what's going to happen, because it's kind of crazy. So I think I still would, but with so much more learning, I would try to be more forceful, because I do think that it's exploitative to assign such responsibility to someone who has not been in a management position before, with the awareness that they don't know what to ask from the start. And if they're not going to, and the article had this really great phrase, Weingart's article, about if you don't like talk about it, if you assume everything's fine, then it's going to quickly descend into chaos. And so it's hard to put that responsibility on the new incoming interim to ask the right questions or to know what to even ask. So yes, I would still do it, but I'm glad I've learned a lot and had a really supportive group of colleagues to help me ask the right questions.
All right, thanks so much, Kim, for that reflection and for sharing. Definitely powerful, and yeah, great connection to Monday's talk. And a comment from Moya in the chat about the positional isolation concept from Katrina Davis Kendrick's research. And yeah, that sounds very familiar. Kayla, I have a question for you, because I think it came up earlier in the conference about mentoring, where some folks have, of course, had not good experiences with mentoring. And I'm wondering if you have come across, or if you have any ideas about the ways that we can prepare folks to be good and supportive mentors.
Sure. So I've been on both sides of that. I've been both a mentee and a mentor. And I think it comes down to really if you feel comfortable in that informal experience, or if you would rather go through like a more formal program that has a liaison. So if that mentee isn't responding to you, you can at least reach out to them through another party to say, hey, are we still, going to do this? Because things change. And the past 2 years, I mean, things have changed a lot. So people may have signed up for something and then realized, I really can't commit to this. And that can leave, a bitter taste in one's mouth, to not want to ever try doing a mentoring experience again because it didn't work out the first time. So my suggestion would be is if you've had those bad experiences, that hopefully that's an outlier situation. And I know with me, I keep a reflection, like a little journal of things that I've learned through the process too, that it might have made it not the best experience for the other person either. So, always constantly growing, learning more, and taking sort of an internal audit of things that we could do better with as well. Like I learned how time sensitive this can be. You have to invest the time in that other person and their growth. And it really is about the mentee. So I would say regardless of what side you were on, if you were a mentee and it wasn't great, so you're hesitant to become a mentor, be the mentor you didn't have, that you were looking for. And if you are a mentor and you didn't have the best mentee, just understand right now is a very difficult time for people, and to maybe give another chance to someone else, because there are people out there that really do need it and they do want somebody to talk to. And right now, I think I learned from watching this conference, listening is so critical, and having somebody just to listen to you, and that soundboard, and maybe somebody that's not in your environment, in your work environment, because we aren't all in environments that we feel that we can thrive in. So having somebody potentially outside of that environment for us to talk to, get ideas from, get feedback from, is critical. But again, look at how much time you have to invest in that, because if you don't have the time, then maybe now is not the time to do it. So I
Yeah,
hope that answers the question.
that's great advice. Thank you. So I think that we are coming up towards the end of our hour together. So I will pause and see if there are any more questions coming in. In the meantime, let me drop the little rainbow reminder in the chat that we do have feedback surveys for all of our sessions that are available in SCED, and we really appreciate you taking the time to fill those out, and we share them back with our presenters as well, of course. And I'm still waiting to see if there's any more questions. Thank you, Moya, appreciate that. And we'll reconvene at 4 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Pacific for our discussion groups, where I think a lot of the conversations that we've had in this lightning talk are really relevant about change management and burnout and all those not fun things, I guess, but real things that we're all experiencing. So definitely invite you to join those and take a break right now. And we'll see you back in about 20 minutes. So thanks, everybody. And thank you so much to our presenters again.